Chillida was interested in the juxtaposition, the interplay of mass and void. And he often worked in incredibly weighty, massive materials, forged iron, forged steel, alabaster, stone. But he also did these incredibly beautiful, lyrical, delicate works on paper that I think many people may not be aware of are the gravitations, where they're not simply collages, but they are cut paper compositions where the layers of paper are separated by space in between them. So there is a sense of depth, there is a sense of kind of sculptural formality to them. And so you see these elements which are consistent throughout his career in such a wide variety of materials that he worked in. One thing that American audiences might not understand about the importance of Chillida's Basque identity is that the modern country of Spain is really made up of several distinct cultural traditions, and the Basques are part of that. They occupy a region of northern Spain and also southern France. They have a distinct language that is related to no other language in the world, and therefore there is an entire literary and cultural and historic tradition that is unique to the Basque region in Spain, and one that they hold very dear, and that is an essential part of their identity. And so Chillida, being one of the leading artistic voices of the Basque country in the middle and last half of the 20th century, one of the things that is characteristic of Chillida's work is universal appeal. Even though his work comes from a very personal place, it was meant for a global audience. It was meant to be understood by anyone who encountered it, because it was as much about the physical experience of the object in that space as anything else. He has important works in the United States. There's the commission here at the Meyerson Symphony Center in Dallas, the great outdoor piece, Abesti Gogora in Houston at the Museum of Fine Arts. There are major works by Chillida that have been available to an American audience. Chillida was commissioned to create a work for Meyerson Symphony Center here in Dallas, which opened in 1989. And he proposed a work that was monumental and appropriate for the public plaza in front of the symphony, called De Musica. And of course, music is such an important part of his career, his life, really. So De Musica is one in a number of works that Chillida dedicated to music or specific composers over his lifetime, including homages to J.S. Bach and Vivaldi. Music, I think, was important to him because it was something that was so affecting. It was persistent and yet ephemeral. You experienced it usually in a particular space. The sound changed the way you experienced the space, and you experienced it over time. And it was that combination of the persistent and the ephemeral that is such an important part of Chillida's work in any material throughout his career. His interest in architecture comes through in his sculpture. Some of them are so vast that they take on the proportions of architecture. And there is that sense of how the built environment affects one's perceptions. That is true in the way that a viewer interacts with a sculpture and physically moving around it and sometimes even moving through it, or even the way that someone moves through a plaza or a building. Those kinds of architectural concerns are inherent in his sculpture. The sense of architectural space absolutely extends to the smaller scale works. One can sometimes imagine the smaller scale works as models of much larger architectural spaces. Some of the stone carvings that he did are incredible because there's the density of the stone and then these very clear pathways and chambers that have been carved out of the stone so that the light penetrates in incredibly beautiful and evanescent ways. The other thing about Chillida sculpture is it's always a physical experience. It doesn't really matter the scale. And this is, I think, true of sculpture in general, but particularly true of Chillida's work, is that it changes so much as you move around it. It presents different faces. And I think that kind of changeling nature of Chillida sculpture in particular, it comes as a surprise. And so I think people end up having a kind of personal connection with the work of art through their experience of it. It's impossible to separate the work of the artist from the context of that time. And Chillida was a polymath, and he was interested not only in art and architecture, but also poetry and literature and philosophy. It went beyond pure interest to this notion, how we conceive of life and its meaning are the stuff of life itself, is something that Chillida pursued intimately and passionately.